Look, in terms of making a total fool out of yourself every single time you open your mouth, I think Israel Adesanya fully encapsulates that. I think, comparing him to other UFC fighters, I don't think anybody comes close. Now, in terms, though, of what this has to do with his fight with Dricus Du Plessis, I don't think it has anything to do with it at all, and I think the only reason one would bring that up is if they didn't like Adesanya. But regardless, who is going to win this fight between him and Dricus? It's a very, very interesting matchup, and to me, the thing that is so interesting about it is the fact that I think Dricus poses a lot of similar challenges that Marvin Vettori posed Israel Adesanya, except for the fact that Dricus is far more explosive and a way better kickboxer. Most people for the longest time were of the mind that Dricus sucked, that he was just not very good, and the reason for that was pretty clear. There's a massive, massive difference in Dricus post-Whittaker and pre-Whittaker. You look at every single fight he had before he fought Robert Whittaker, and there were a few things that really stood out. For one, Dricus would fight very spazzy and very sporadic. He would essentially just empty the kitchen sink at you from the moment the fight started up until the end. And, it just didn't look very good. But he kept winning fights. Especially when it came to the Darren Till fight, most people were just of the mind that, Darren Till just sucks. The reason why, Dricus was able to get by this fight by the skin of his teeth was because Darren Till is straight up dog shit. He's terrible. That was just a horrible performance. Nobody respected Darren Till after that. People were in disbelief he lost to a guy of such low skill level. Because Dricus, he got in a very good position early in that fight, just landed about 1,000 of ground and pound shots, and, Dricus was completely gassed. He was toast after that, and Darren started kind of picking up the pace and started having success, but he ended up just getting out-wrestled and then choked. And like I said, nobody gave Darren Till any kind of goodwill after that fight. Everybody was like, wow, that's terrible. That's fucking atrocious. That is straight up such an embarrassment on Darren Till's part. I cannot believe Darren Till went out there with that performance. At the time, he was training with Hamzat every day. You know what I mean? And that's how you're going to look against this fucking grasshopper in Dricus Du Plessis? Like, how goddamn embarrassing. Like, how do you call yourself an elite MMA fighter? Like, you used to be, people thought you were going to be the next big thing. People thought you were going to be a star. People thought that you were going to fight Adesanya one day. And this is how you're performing. It's awful. It's terrible. But since then, we've actually learned that Dricus is pretty good. But like I said, the Whittaker fight was the first time that we saw him not fight so sporadic. In fact, he stuck to a pretty simple game plan in that fight that was very, very effective, and that was try to land a jab as Whittaker blitzes in. That was his strategy. And at the very start of that fight, you see Whittaker seemed to be a step ahead technically. He was moving in with a jab, wasn't landing it super cleanly, but he was able to chain it into a very well-timed takedown. He was having success, but Dricus landed one jab right as Whittaker was blitzing in, and you see Whittaker's legs buckle as soon as Dricus landed. And from that moment onward, the fight changed. It was completely different. And Dricus put it on him, was able to take him down, had some nasty ground and pound, and then again finished the fight by timing a jab right as Whittaker stepped in, and he finished the fight. And like I said, that is when we realized that Dricus was pretty good. And specifically, what makes him so good is, for one, I think attributes plays a huge factor here because he is so durable. He is so insanely durable, which I attribute just to the mass of this individual. Just look at this guy. He's jacked. He's very, very big. And like I said, the big difference between him and someone like Marvin Vettori, who I would also say is pretty fridgy, is that Dricus is way more explosive and a lot faster. So yeah, he will eat a lot of shots. He doesn't have the best head movement. He kind of covers up and then backs up as soon as guys move forward with punches. But it is so hard to hurt him. It is so hard to put him away. And he goes at you very, very hard. And I think people get stunned by his power. I think that's what happened to Whittaker. And I think you go back and look at a lot of Dricus fights, and it seems like the guy he's fighting is, real confident, moving very fluidly, moving in and out, timing really good shots until they get hit once, and then all of a sudden the fight's over. And going back to Dricus' durability, there was a moment when he was fighting Darren Till where, he had emptied the kitchen sink on him round one. He was fairly gassed. He was entering into range pretty recklessly. And Darren Till timed 2 clean elbows right as Dricus was moving in. And he never seemed stunned by it. Never. And in fact, he just kept going forward even after eating both of them. And to me, of course, the Sean Strickland fight is when you really realize how good Dricus is. Because Dricus, he stuck to a very simple game plan in that fight. And that was, I cannot get walked down by Sean Strickland. I have to go at him and put him on the back foot constantly. Which, like I said, you look at the old Dricus and you say, well, he kind of goes at you recklessly sometimes. He doesn't have the best defense and his cardio has been put into question. And you say, well, he may have success early, but we get into the 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds, you're going to assume Strickland's going to start taking over. But that didn't happen. Dricus went at him the entire time. He ate a lot of jabs. A lot of them. His face was busted up bad by the end of this fight, but it never deterred him. He kept going forward, kept swinging huge shots. He was getting closer and closer to landing until eventually he did start landing. And, he was hurting Sean a lot worse than Sean was hurting him. He was mixing in takedowns very well, and he did not gas out. His cardio was perfect all 5 rounds. Now, a lot of people will tell you, though, that Dricus was way too reckless in this fight. He was coming in with these huge misses, and if you do that against Adesanya, he's going to make you pay for it. Well, I got 2 things to say. One, the reason why Dricus was so wild was because Sean was not making him pay for it. I mean, Dricus was not throwing that wild against Robert Whittaker, but against Strickland, because Strickland was not finding any counters, he had no reason to stop moving forward with the big haymakers until he started landing. And again, you go back to Adesanya, he is not known for finding counters either. He's known for sliding out of range when you move forward and then going back to jabbing and leg kicking. I think a theoretical foil to Dricus' style is someone with the skill set of a prime Conor McGregor. Somebody who is just elite at slipping your right hands and making you pay with a 2, 3, 4 punch boxing combination. But that's not Adesanya. I mean, it's just not. And again, though, still, you can't be too reckless against him. Robert Whittaker was lunging in really bad against Adesanya in their first fight, and he did eventually get tagged. But, what we've seen from Dricus, his last 2 fights were very specialized game plans dependent on who he was going up against. So to say that you think he's going to fight Adesanya the exact same way he fought Sean Strickland, I just wouldn't lean that way at all. So with that all laid out, how is Adesanya going to deal with that? Because, something I have talked about in depth on this channel before is the fact that Adesanya, he has a bit of a boxing problem. You go back and you look at every single Israel Adesanya fight in existence against guys very big, very strong, and, durable, I would say, like Dricus, and you're going to see the exact same thing. These guys are moving forward with punches. Adesanya uses his height and his length to slide out of range, get back to the center, where he does 2 things: jabs and leg kicks. And those 2 things were enough to completely pick apart whoever he was fighting. They just did not have the ability to close the distance between them. They would go at him, Adesanya, head movement, circle, jab, leg kick, over and over and over again. Which makes perfect sense. Adesanya, being the slightly smaller, lankier, faster guy, does not want to be fighting in the pocket with these big, fridgy motherfuckers. Especially not because Adesanya, like I said, his boxing is not the strongest aspect of his game. Which, if you're in the pocket, your boxing better be good. So, to me, this is the big first variable we need to look at with this matchup. Because, I don't think there's a question. On the outside, Adesanya is going to have a massive advantage. I think his jab is going to be landing all day long. As I said, Dricus relies very heavily on his durability. He doesn't use the most amount of head movement. And as far as the leg kicks go, I've never seen Dricus do an amazing job at defending leg kicks, but at the same time, I've never really seen anybody target it super heavily. So, it's tough to say. You would assume Dricus is going to be very well prepared for the leg kicks, but, you never know. But Adesanya, he also has very good body and head kicks, and in terms of doing damage, that is where it's going to come from for Adesanya. Stand on the outside, jabbing, throwing head kicks, ripping body kicks, ripping leg kicks. That is how he's going to win this fight, if he can keep it in that area. So Dricus, we know he has to close the distance. He has to get in his face and stuff his kicks. And if he can do that, and he can really get into boxing range and unload, he's going to have a massive advantage. Because, like I said, you go back and you look at the Marvin Vettori fight for one specific example. Every time Vettori moved in with punches, Adesanya was leaning back. That is the perfect opportunity for one, to shoot for takedowns, and two, to attack the body. And Dricus, he has very explosive, very quick takedowns. He gets very low and shoots good traditional double legs, which is going to make it difficult to defend. And of course, the most impressive thing about Dricus in this area is his strength. I mean, without a doubt. There was a moment where he was fighting Darren Till where he was going for a double leg up against the fence. And in this position right here, you would absolutely need your hands locked to secure the takedown. But Dricus, just grabbing the back of Darren's legs, flipped him to get the takedown. And one thing I absolutely love about Dricus is his top pressure. You know, most guys, when they get on top from full guard, they just elect to stay there. But Dricus, when he gets to full guard, he hits these amazing guard passes. Like the one he hit on Whittaker, where he stepped to the side, kind of stretching the guard out, breaking it open, getting around the leg to side control, where he landed a monster elbow. It's a serious problem. And here as well, look at the shoulder pressure Dricus is using as he slides into mount. The way he was forcing Giles' head the opposite direction with his shoulder is going to make it absolutely miserable to defend. And that is what makes Dricus such a problem, that he's so heavy on top and he is so good at getting to dominant positions if he gets you flat on your back. And of course, against Adesanya, this is where he's going to want to be. If he can get Adesanya flat on his back out in the open, that is the most ideal spot for Dricus. His ground and pound is devastating, and he's going to be a serious problem to try to stand back up against. And not to mention, every single mat return he attempted on Sean Strickland, he was successful with. For the most part, Dricus chose to disengage from most grappling exchanges once Strickland stood back up. So honestly, I think the one way Adesanya can defend against all of this is with movement, right? When you look at most recently Leon Edwards versus Belal Muhammad, the big difference maker there was Belal was walking Leon down, getting right in his face, and Leon was not moving. He was getting very stationary up against the fence, which opened up the takedowns. But Izzy, he's always on his bike. He's constantly circling. And if Dricus cannot head him off and he cannot prevent Adesanya from constantly getting back to the center where he has an advantage, it's going to be a big problem for him. And as I mentioned earlier, when Adesanya's fighting guys like Costa, Vettori, Cannonier, these guys had no ability to head Adesanya off. They had no ability to really close the distance. But there was a moment in Adesanya's second fight against Whittaker, where Whittaker, he was threatening with takedowns, and he had backed Adesanya all the way up to the fence, right to this point here. And you see where Whittaker is at, right here. He has Adesanya pressured up against the fence. And if I'm him, I'm getting right underneath him, just like Mike Tyson, and I'm ripping to the body, ripping upstairs, because this is where Adesanya has problems, in the pocket with nowhere to go with his back up against the fence. Or at the very least, shoot another takedown right here. But you know what Whittaker does? He backs himself up back to the center and resets. And frankly, I don't know. I think I attribute that to Whittaker just giving him too much respect. But, I mean, only Whittaker knows what he was thinking in that moment. Because put Dricus in that exact situation, and he's getting right in the pocket, and he is unloading on Adesanya. And like I said, I think that's where he wins this fight. Because, again, you go back and you look at the Marvin Vettori fight, and Vettori was getting deep on double legs up against the fence with, just being honest, not a ton of really good setups. He essentially had two modes of offense during that fight. Either move forward with punches or move forward with double legs. And those two options allowed him to get deep on takedowns up against the fence, and he even was able to secure a few of them. Now, he was never able to get any real ground and pound off, never really attempted to pass Adesanya's guard, which in theory would be Dricus' difference maker. I mean, his ground and pound is devastating. Every time he gets on top of people, he fucking puts a hurting on him. I mean, that's for sure. But again, again, we're now hearing rumblings that Adesanya got up to 230 pounds at the start of his camp for Dricus. And if he has put on a lot of size, that is only going to help him and aid him in grappling exchanges. So, again, we're not going to know for 100% certainty until we see it, but I think the game plan for both Dricus and Adesanya, it's very, very clear. Adesanya needs to stay on the outside, jab, and rip a lot of kicks. Every single time Dricus moves in with strikes, he's got to be on his bike. He's got to be ready to circle immediately. Get back to space, get back to jabbing and leg kicking, which is what we've seen him do over and over and over again. And of course, for Dricus, he needs to pressure Adesanya up against the fence, throw punches, get in the pocket, get him to lean back and rely on head movement so he can either shoot takedowns or rip to the body. And honestly, based on what we know from both of these fighters, I think it's more likely Dricus succeeds with that game plan, and I am leaning towards him winning this fight.